Welcome back to the Dr. Joe Show. We are doing things a little differently today. I have a very special guest with us, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of humor, mental health, and trying to be around healthy people. So before we start, before I introduce our guest wrote an article on his blog website in 2006, and it was a article called How to Spot Pedos. And the article may have led to the capturing of one or more of these pedos. So he is a satirist. He is a writer. He has written several books. He has a very successful podcast series. May I introduce Maddox? Welcome, Maddox.
Thank you for having me. Great introduction. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Maddox, due to medical training and just being under a rock, more or less, I lost track of a lot of your podcasts, and then I caught up very rapidly. And so the way we connected, everybody, I had commented, and the way this started, we were just talking about personality disorders, and with the recent upheaval, I could say in your work, in some of the relationships you had with your other podcasts, it seems like there might have been some personality disorders going on there. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. It's a pretty good petri dish for personality disorders, I think, that have been that has gone
Yeah,
on my podcast for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So, do you think you detected that in them? At any point, did it surprise you the way they started betraying you and stealing everything? Or
Yeah, so to give a little bit of context for people who don't know, when I first moved to Los Angeles, one of the first people to reach out to me through my publisher was this guy who was just really champing at the bits to befriend me, get in touch with me, to know me. And I didn't know too many people at the time. When I first moved out here, I was like, okay, this guy seems all right. We met up, we got a drink at a bar. My editor originally pitched him as an SEO guy. He's like, yeah, he does like web crap for porn sites. And I'm like, I don't want to meet this guy. And then he said, oh, well, he also writes here and there. And I'm like, okay, if he's another writer, maybe I can meet up with this guy. So this dude turned out like he used to send me fan mail that I didn't even realize until years later. He was like just a longtime fan of mine, and he was trying to angle his way into my life. And when I met him, I didn't know that we just kind of met as potential. I don't even know what we met for, but he really wanted to get into my life, and so we became friends. We became really close at one point. And over the years, he hated his day job. This guy was working in SEO, and like my editor said, he was doing web crap for porn sites, and he really wanted to crack into comedy. So I started taking him to pitch meetings here and there, as many as I could. I would introduce him to writers and agents and managers and production companies, and almost everyone would pull me aside and say, "Look, we like you, but we're not going to work with this guy. We don't like him." So, in spite of that, I don't like to give up on my friends. So, I wanted to continue to work with him and try to, get him a foothold in the industry. We eventually started a podcast together, and it went for about 2 years before things started really going sour. And I eventually caught him talking behind my back, using me for money. In his own words, he said he was using me for money, hiding financial records from me, and that's where this whole ugly ball of nonsense starts to unravel.
oh, um, folks, if you want more on this topic, I will be putting links in the description box. So make sure you check out Maddox's YouTube page. Okay, so that's a good summary. And so your last post was almost like 4 months ago. Has there been any developments since then?
Yeah, so eventually I decided to at this so he became like an obsessed stalker for over 5.5, 6 years, still ongoing, by the way, and just completely obsessed with me. Not a single day goes by. For 5 years there was a period where almost every single day he would tweet about me, talk about me, obsess over me, even to this day, he's still like recording podcast episodes about me. I have no idea what he's talking about, but all I know is that he's talking about me because he uses my name to market and promote all of his podcasts. He has nothing else in his life. Uh, and so I eventually decided to make a documentary about this and tell people my story because it didn't seem like this was going away. At first, I tried to stay quiet about it, but when you stay silent about somebody who's continually attacking you day after day, year after year, it gives the perception of guilt, right? This person's constantly being attacked and he's not saying anything to defend himself, so therefore he must be guilty of something. That wasn't the case here. I just didn't want to give this sociopath any attention, but it got way out of hand, way out of control because he is just a relentless, obsessed stalker. So I made this documentary, and since it came out, actually, somebody made a false privacy complaint against my documentary to get it taken down. Someone really doesn't want people to see this documentary.
Yeah, there's two other episodes that vanished there, and there were comments about it, and I did notice that. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
There's also Rumble that you could upload to.
Yes.
So that's always a backup plan to get the truth out.
It's
So
going
so
to, yeah, it's going to come back up. It's going to exist.
yeah, so I mean, just I and you used the good word sociopath because psychopaths are usually very hard to manage, and psychopaths are very calculating, and sociopaths are sort of belligerent and kind of dumb.
Right.
And that's a fair use of the word, I would say. So, um, how do you get out of this? I mean, how do you get him to stop contacting you? And you've been doing no contact, right? Like just
Yes.
not
No,
responding.
no
Yeah.
contact, no communication whatsoever. I've blocked him. I preemptively block him anywhere. If there's a new social media platform, if I have an inkling that he might be on it, I will immediately preemptively block this person. I want no contact with him, no communication. And
Yeah.
if he ever reaches out to me in any capacity or asks someone to reach out on his behalf, I will absolutely file a restraining order. That was something that a lot of people had suggested over the years, and I was reluctant to do so for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you don't get it, that just emboldens the stalker, right? And even if you do
Yeah.
get it, if somebody has a platform, they can use dog whistles and different language and say things like, "Oh, I can't contact him." You know, the judge just says my name is on this restraining order, but he didn't say it about anyone else. So he
Right.
would like very heavily hint at like, okay, you guys can contact him and that sort of thing. There's a movie that, excuse me, a documentary series that came out on Netflix. It's kind of a dramatic, not quite a documentary, but a drama series about stalkers called Baby Reindeer. And so many people sent this link to me. They're like, you need to watch this. It's very similar to your story. And I got chills at times at how similar the story was.
Wow. Well, yeah, I haven't had Netflix in a while, but now you got me interested. So back to your podcast. You're going to continue with the podcast eventually?
Yeah, I'll do a podcast series again. I took a break for a while to just work on different things.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy putting my creative energy into a lot of different projects and properties. And I like to do live streaming. I like to do 3D modeling. I like to produce video games and write and,
Mm-hmm.
do all sorts of fun things that aren't necessarily podcast related. I've written a comic book and I've written a calendar and books, and I've worked on TV shows and movies, and like those are things that I enjoy doing, and I want to just try it all and do it all. So eventually I'll go back to podcasting, but not at the moment.
I I think one of the things I wanted to talk about was all of the humor you have about children. I think it's fascinating because on the surface it looks like you don't like kids at all, but when you actually delve into it, you're actually getting people to think about really raising their kids and strengthening their children. What do
Yeah.
you think of that?
Absolutely. So it's kind of the school of thought that my father raised me with, which is my father was never easy on me when it came to grades or school assignments or anything like that. And I took inspiration from that. So I remember this anecdote I talk about in my second book, I Am Better Than Your Kids, where I brought home a hammer that I made in my shop class. And I showed it to my dad, relatively proud of it. I used a lathe and I, buffed it, made it really smooth, good looking hammer. And my dad, uh, he just kind of smirked and he goes, "You call that a hammer? I'll show you a hammer." And then he goes into his shop with his 60 plus, 70 plus years of shop making and handiwork experience, and sat at for an hour or two just working on his own hammer, his own version of a hammer, and he came out with the most immaculate, beautifully engineered, perfect hammer I've ever seen. He goes, "That's a hammer." So there's one of two ways to interpret that, which is one is to be discouraged and to quit, which is not my attitude, not what I believe. The other is to take inspiration from it. When a master shows you his work, you just shrug your shoulders and walk away in defeat? No. To me,
Oh,
that's a call to action. That's
yeah.
a challenge. That's
Yep.
a challenge to step up to that level of
Yep.
expertise. And that's how
Yeah.
I always interpret it. So in my book, I talk about this. Actually, this was quoted in a very famous movie. I can't prove they got it for me, but I said two of the most dangerous words in the English language are good job. Because when
Uh,
you tell a child good job and you don't mean it and they didn't do a good job, that sometimes signals to them that they can quit. They've done it. They've achieved the level that they need to achieve. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that you should tell a child good job, especially if they didn't do a good job. I
yeah.
always, in fact, at times I've had to tutor children and work with children, and I've had friends who have nephews and nieces, and they ask me to sit down and play with them and teach them. When I do, I bring that approach towards that. I say, okay, you're not there yet. Let's just keep trying. I don't
Yep.
want to lie to the child. I don't want to tell them they did a good job if they didn't.
Yeah. I Gandhi said, "My devotion is to truth, not consistency." And and kids will resent you if you lie to them or if you do not carry through on your promises. They like children will bear that resentment, whether it's subconscious or not. They will bear it.
Right. You can
Um,
almost never trust a compliment coming from your mom. If a parent is giving you a compliment, don't trust it, don't believe it. Look, they may mean it and they may mean well, but if
yeah.
it's coming from a parent, it's usually coming from a place of love and they want to build you up and encourage
Mhm.
you. But that's not necessarily the truth. That's not necessarily honest. That's
Yeah.
just how they feel about you.
And I think that's where the phrase "it takes a village" comes from. We were intended to be part of a type of tribe where we have our parents who like birthed us, and then there's all the relations around, and they're a little bit more objective in ways, and they supplement the family. That's why you need a tribe or a village of sorts.
Yeah, on the note of criticism and intent, I remember at one point when I was going back and forth with my editor for one of my books, and there was a point like we very rarely disagreed on anything on a fundamental level. He was generally a very reasonable person. He was the
Mm-hmm.
type of person who was persuasive, but simultaneously able to be persuaded, which is a very rare characteristic. So occasionally I would have conversations with him, and usually we'd either convince each other one way or the other, and we'd agree. But there was one point where we just kept going back and forth. And eventually he told me, he said, "Listen, I wrote a long email in response to you, and I decided not to send it because I feel like it may temper our friendship." And I said, "Listen, you can always tell me something critical about me or my work, and I know it's coming from a good place because you want me to succeed. If that criticism comes from the public, from a stranger, that person may not want me to succeed. In fact, they most likely want me to fail. So I'm going to get that criticism either way. I'd rather it come from somebody who loves me and cares about me and wants to see me succeed rather than somebody who wants to tear me down and break me apart and wants me to fail."
Yeah, and that's where tempering comes from. That's where you have to choose where your vulnerabilities are, and when to allow yourself to receive and when to put up your shield of sorts. You have to be
Right.
able to shield. Yeah. Um, yeah. There was an article that I found that was so good, and I just wanted to tell you I've done this. Okay, your junk mail article.
Oh, yeah.
I've done this. I still do it. I
Junk
do
to
it.
junk.
You junk the junk, and it's the most brilliant article. People should check out maddox.xmission.com right now. I don't remember what year it's from because it's all out of order now. But
If you
and
just
also,
Google the phrase junk the junk and Maddox, you should be able to find it.
yeah. And just so folks know, there is some anybody that goes to that website, you have been warned. You are guaranteed to get offended, and if you
Right.
do, that's great because being uncomfortable is good. Um, there was where is it? Man, see, like I had all these ideas, and they're all just floating around, and so this is just kind of like flowing right now.
It happens. To give some context for that article in particular, a long time ago, I got the idea, and I wasn't the first person to come up with this either. I think many people had done it at the time, but I got this idea that if you get this junk mail in the mail with like a return address, and at the time there was so much junk mail. I think this was the late 90s where every other piece of mail was a piece of junk mail where it would have a postage paid return address. And
Yes,
what you could do with that postage paid envelope is you could just stuff it with garbage and send it in the mail, and the recipient would pay the postage fare. So you could just fill it up with bricks or dirt or anything you wanted to, slap it on a box and mail it to the person who shipped it to you, and they would have to pay the carrier fee. And that
yeah,
was a very effective way of making it untenable, financially untenable for people to spam you.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I found another article. It's sort of unrelated, but you posted an article called "Nothing Gets Past Airport Security," and you posted this in June of 2001. Um, so I thought the timing was interesting because that was also the same month and year that the pilot episode of Lone Gunman came out. Do you remember that series from X Files?
Lone Gunman? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so X Files, everybody's heard of X Files, but a lot of people don't know about the offshoot series that ran for one season called The Lone Gunman. And the pilot episode aired in June of 2001, and the pilot episode featured the lone gunman thwarting an attempt for people to crash a plane into the World Trade Center.
Wow, I had no idea. No, I hadn't heard of
Yeah,
this.
and then there was a radio show called The Hour of the Time by Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper was a Vietnam veteran, and he sort of a conservative talk show radio host guy. But he predicted in June, and I have the recording. You can find the recording, I think, that he predicted that there would be an attack on the soil of the U.S. in June. And then there were other people that were predicting this independently. So and then you happen to write this article. Okay, this is where it gets woo woo, Maddox. Do you believe in consciousness?
Yes.
Okay, so do you think it's possible that we're all connected in this global consciousness, and that we tap into it without knowing, and sometimes we are synchronously acting? Is that possible, do you think?
That's an interesting question. Now we're starting to get into something that's part philosophical and part faith. There have been a lot of people who have suggested this. There are people who've tried to do studies where they have two distinct, unconnected tribes in South America and
Yep.
Africa that try to both simultaneously come up with something, and they haven't quite yet been able to reproduce these examples. So
Hmm.
if this is a phenomenon that's possible, which could be, I don't know that I've seen the evidence for it yet,
So,
but there is something to, I mean, there's a different word for this concept, and it's zeitgeist. So there is something that is in the air, and it's the kind of mood and affect and philosophy of the generation and the time and the culture. And that's happened all throughout all throughout history. There's been zeitgeist moments and themes and eras, like in the 60s with drugs and music and free sex and the hippie movement and the anti-war movement. Those are things that are in the zeitgeist. You want to make
mhm.
the argument that it's a national or international or global consciousness? Maybe. I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence for it, but it's a lot of people believe that.
It seems there was evidence, and it was documented by a guy named Cliff High. Have you heard of the Webbot Project?
Cliff Hyde is the guy's name?
Yeah, Cliff High, and his first name is just with one F, Cliff.
Okay.
So he apparently he published data from this project that he was doing, and I don't remember the years he was doing it. I think it was so he started it I think in the late 90s, and it went into the I think before 2007 or 2008, and then it got cut. So what happened was he created all these web bots. He created a Yahoo bot and a Google bot and all these bots, and they're crawling the internet. And they're ripping all the data, all the search data coming out of the internet like all at once. And Cliff High, who's a diagnosed schizophrenic, by the way, okay? Cliff High thought that this project would be able to get so much data, and maybe he could make some sense of the raw data from people doing internet searches. And it's interesting because he found spikes in searches in certain topics before major events that were reported to the world.
Hmm.
So right before Michael Jackson died, there was a spike in searches of Michael Jackson, and it was considered like abnormal. There was a spike in Osama bin Laden searches right before 9/11, and so forth. There were several examples of this from his Webbot project. And then he stopped doing it because he claimed that when Obama modified the Smith-Mundt Act, it basically normalized the news being sort of warped further, even further than it already is by the CIA, which then made the Webbot project not work as well, at least according to him. But that first data that he had, I thought that was kind of interesting. If the data were true, and there's no way to validate the data, but that's at least what he claimed. But I remember forums when I saw the Google bot and the Yahoo bot. Do you remember seeing that on forums?
I know of web bots and web scrapers. I hadn't particularly heard of this guy's work and research, but I am looking at a Wikipedia page called Webbot, and it says it's an internet bot. Like it basically describes what a bot is and the crawling technology behind it. And it talks about this guy, Cliff High, along with his associate George Ure, I'm not sure, but he says he
Yeah.
keep the technology and algorithms largely secret and sell the predictions via the website. It's interesting. So it looks like he was trying to use this potentially to try to predict the stock market around 1997. And
Yeah.
also, I guess they had a big
Mm-hmm.
prediction that the 2012 there would be like a big cataclysmic world event around 2012, December 21st, 2012.
Yep. This that 2012 nonsense.
I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that was supposed to correlate rather with the Aztec calendar, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, look, around that time, so I wrote that article for a reason that I was kind of clowning on TSA and how bad, it wasn't even TSA at the time. Was this okay, June of 2020? Yeah, June of
Yeah.
2001, right? So it was
Mhm.
post 9/11. Was it?
It was pre
Just
9/11.
pre
It was
9/11.
yeah.
I remember how bad airport security was. And
Mm-hmm.
this was so bad to the point where first of all, I love to test security systems. Anytime I see a security system, I immediately spot loopholes. I spot ways to circumvent it. And then for no nefarious intent, I always would prefer to just contact the security administration and say, hey, by the way, this is the way I can exploit I'm kind of like a white hat hacker
Uh-huh.
where I find exploits and then just tell them about it so they can patch them up. Because as a consumer who's flying on these planes, I want them to be the most secure and I want them to be the most safe. If I can get by their security system and sneak things in, I'm sure other people doing it. And clearly we saw the repercussions of that on 9/11. But also, even leading up to 9/11, there were presidential daily briefings. These are reports they called PDBs. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a presidential daily briefing report in August of 2001, right before 9/11. And the title of it was Osama bin Laden intent to attack inside the United States. Could not be more clear. And that report was completely ignored. There was also
Yep.
supposedly an agent in the Philippines who had inside knowledge because they were talking to some inmate they had, some terrorist inmate that they had caught from either an Al Qaeda cell or some tangentially related terrorist cell who also knew of this plan and confessed it to this agent in the Philippines uh,
Mm-hmm.
or Indonesia. It was one of the two. And the reports were ignored. So there were a lot of signs, a lot of potential ways we could have noticed that and known that ahead of time.
Yeah, there's still so many questions as to how that was managed, including like the air exercises happening that day that had to happen that day, and then it allowed everything to happen. So I thought that was interesting. And then your follow up Dr. Seuss article,
Right.
which I mean I think some people may have overlooked. Maybe I missed it, or maybe I was too busy with high school. I don't know. But you made this Dr. Seuss thing in 2003 called "Would You Like to Bomb Iran?" I mean, this is the perfect summary of what the United States was doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I think it was so raw and it was so true that like I think it was just shocked people. And but you go back and look at it now and you're like, oh yeah, this is a historical document. So your work, people should understand that like satirists like yourself have their finger on the pulse of reality. And oftentimes the work of a satirist is a more reliable historical database than the history books.
Right. I think
And
it's oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I just think it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have told me that, and I think that the Daily Show has been referred to as more accurate and more honest,
Mm-hmm.
more forthright than the nightly news. And in many ways it is, because you're kind of going above and outside of the discourse, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a believer in, quote, the media. I don't think the media is a monolith. I don't think that they're getting their calling orders from one big thing to like, okay, this is what we're going to discuss. Although with Sinclair Broadcasting, there is a clip from Sinclair Broadcasting where they actually do get their marching orders from a higher up, where they were sent out a script. And Joe Rogan has played this on his podcast, but they all say essentially the same thing. And it was kind of like a very pro nationalistic, jingoistic kind of screed where everyone comes out and talks about the importance of good journalism and so on. But you can see every single station saying the exact same thing. But I still, in spite of that, I still don't think that the media is a monolith that they could just have such high level marching orders to have a political agenda or be a conspiracy to either suppress or promote some particular idea without a single person leaking that information. I think that would be absolutely insane. So the satirists come in, like myself and Jon Stewart, and we talk about things outside of the discourse, outside of the narrative. We're going to latch on to that weird thing that the politician said that people aren't really paying attention to. Well, hold on. What did he mean by that? Why aren't we talking more about this? Because the quote media is going to be talking about the discourse, about what's important, the bills they're discussing, that sort of thing, but they're not really listening to the subtext always.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to triangulate multiple news sources to like get the best picture of something, because you don't get the whole thing unless you put them all together, right?
Yes,
Um,
I'm a big fan. So my most trusted news sources that I generally go to, and they're generally pretty good, is I like AP, Reuters. They're about the most boring news possible. So when it comes to news, I have a rule of thumb. The more boring it is, the more trustworthy it is. If you're
yeah,
getting excited reading the news, it's probably BS. Then I move on from there to NPR, BBC. They have their biases, and one is slight left, one is, and one might be like pro something or other. Like BBC's
yeah,
generally good news, except when it comes to reporting on the royal family.
yeah,
NHK is the Japanese version of BBC. They're a great news organization, except when it comes to reporting news on China. And
yeah,
China has South China Morning Post, which is also a great news reporting agency, except when it comes to reporting things on Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. So
yeah.
you can start to suss out like the biases each country has, each news organization has with the other countries that they might have problems with. But as long as you're aware of those biases, you can control for those variables and get some relatively decent news.
Exactly. Uh, the other thing I want to talk about, and we're moving back to kids here, okay, folks, because I think Maddox cares more about your kids than most of you do. Oh,
You said
how
it.
Dis- how Disney ruined the Little Mermaid. Okay, and you were nice in this video. You didn't even mention the fact that there's coral shaped like a penis on the original VHS of this, and the and the marriage officiant guy at the end actually was getting an erection at the very end of the movie. That there was I saw the clip of that. But the Grimm Tales, the original Grimm Tales, and how they have been ruined. How do you see us getting out of the mess that we are apparently in, at least in terms of our children? The fact that we have things like this and people aren't even reading the Grimm Tales. What do you think?
Right. So there's so many arguments about this, both on both sides of the political spectrum, that, everyone tries to carry this mantle of anti-censorship, right? From the left, it's like, well, we're trying to remove certain words and certain books from schools. Like, for example, the Huckleberry books, because there's some language in there, and they try to censor that, and then you get people who might be more on the conservative side of the spectrum saying, no, no, we should leave that in. And then you have from the conservative side of things, well, we got this book in schools that is talking about like some gay stuff. And Disney's come along on top of everything, and they're just saying, we just want to make money. And so Disney makes the most happy, saccharine, packageable product, and that's what it is. Let's call it what it is. It's a
Yeah.
product. They're going to sell it and try to market it to children to make as much money as possible. And they focus test with audiences. And every single time they focus test with audiences don't like a sad ending. In fact, the original First Blood, Rambo First Blood with
Mm-hmm.
Sylvester Stallone, they had an ending that was super depressing. It was a suicide ending, and most people haven't even seen it. They released it on a director's cut years later, and it was, by the way, a great ending. It was a very poetic ending. It was very somber in tone. It was very sad. But when they focus tested it with audiences, everyone was like, oh, I never want to see this movie again. I feel terrible. So they changed the ending and then built it into a franchise so they could continue pumping out Rambo movies, year after year, which I don't complain about because I love Rambo. But when they have a sad ending, like a lot of the Hans Christian Andersen movies, or excuse me, the original fairy tales, they are sad because they teach you a lesson. And
Yeah.
in particular, with the Little Mermaid, it's a fantastic story as it was originally told. In fact, the original story is so much more gruesome than the original Disney version. Excuse me, the remade Disney version,
Yeah.
because the princess suffers a lot. In the original version, she not only loses her voice, but when she's walking around on land, it feels like pinpricks on her feet. So she's suffering every single footstep that she takes. And she doesn't have a happy ending. She wants to fall in love with the prince, but the prince falls in love with someone else. And she realizes the only way she can save herself is to take the prince's life. And she decides at the end, she makes a moral decision. She says, no, he did nothing wrong to me. It's my choice. And I'm not going to take an innocent life just because I made a decision and it didn't work out in my favor. It's a very powerful lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I can count on one hand the number of children's stories that teach that kind of lesson, and it's zero. I can't think of any other than the original Hans Christian Andersen's version of that story.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, fantastic, and we lose all of that when Disney comes along and they make some saccharine, stupid version where everyone is just happy and dancing and singing at the end of the movie.
Yeah. That you made me think of Joaquin Phoenix's performance in Joker. That movie didn't have a very happy ending, and you kind of walk out of the theater being like, kind of, wow, this is like really messed up feeling. I mean, it's not a very happy ending at all, and I think the effect that movie had on me was I got the sense that the movie is trying to get me to empathize with the Joker as much as possible, and so the whole point of the movie was to get into the Joker's head and to experience crazy. So that's why I thought that movie was a very interesting um point on the whole Batman series, because most of the Batman movies have this really happy ending, and that one was just bizarre. Did you see it?
Yes, I did see it. I was a bit distracted when I saw it. I think I was on a first date.
Oh, okay.
Things got real spicy, and but,
Yeah.
but I did see the movie for the most part, and I do remember it being a real bummer jam at the end.
Yeah.
I think with those type of movies, what they're doing to some degree of success is they're trying to make you empathize with the bad guy, the quote bad guy,
Mhm.
right? And they did a good job in that movie by making you empathize with them because clearly this is a person who's suffering from dissociative identity disorder and a malady of other disorders, PTSD and trauma. And he's also a guy who's been bullied and beat down a lot. And so you see this guy kind of rise up through those ranks, a guy who's just about had it, and he just goes out and unleashes all of his nastiness and sociopathy into society. And it's not as black and white as a traditional villain. You think of the
No.
1966 Batman and Robin, where the Joker is just this maniacal bad guy and he's just black and white. He's just a bad dude and he's
Yeah.
there to kill and do shenanigans. And then the first time you started seeing that them break the mold with that character was in the original Christopher Nolan Batman movies. So
Hmm.
the start of that movie, first of all, I didn't like the original movie. I like The Dark Knight a lot, but the original movie, part of the reason I didn't like it is because they made me empathize with the bad guys too much.
Yeah.
At the start of the movie, it was almost a throwaway scene, but it was a montage where they did a really good job of making you empathize with the bad guys in the city. They said, yeah, these mobsters are running the city, but it's because the local politicians have let it fall by the wayside, and there is no other employment, so they don't have a choice. And these desperate people are turning to drugs and violence, and the mobs that are the only ones offering them jobs. So now when I hear that, I think, okay, well, are they bad? Are they evil? Or are they just trying to survive? Are they doing what any other normal person would do to pay
Yeah.
the bills and survive in a really tough city? And then it made me think, like, well, is Batman the hero here? He's just beating up poor people.
No. Yeah. Yeah. I think, boy, that is something I looked over. But yeah, the comic books, the animated series was very black and white, and it didn't even develop the Joker at all. It was just Mark Hamill's amazing voice acting. But um, I think maybe maybe it was just that Bruce Wayne was so traumatized and in darkness, and he had to transform the darkness into something constructive. And so that constructiveness, it was necessarily destruction, and so and I think that's why Dark Knight Rises. Maybe that's he's rising out of it and finally getting out of the city that's dark. I don't know.
I think about the original Batman series, and what was so compelling about it was it did allow you to have this black and white nature of good and evil, where this person is doing something bad to you, and you're just going out there and you're completely justified in punching his face forever. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes you feel like, okay, I'm on the side of a righteous cause. Hell yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
Then when you start playing with that formula a little bit too much, and you're saying, well, okay, the people who killed Batman's parents, Bruce Wayne's parents, was mentally unwell and or in a desperate situation. Look, obviously you should never do that kind of thing, and you can never
Yeah.
justify it. But you can also take a different tack. Like, for example, if you remember the Charlottesville shooter, I think it was Charlottesville or South Carolina, somewhere, where the church shooter, I think Dylan Roof was the guy's name,
Okay.
where he shot up a black church and killed something like 9 people. One of the most horrific crimes. And his goal was to try to foment a race war. And he was just a deep neo-Nazi, just one of the worst people. And something I took inspiration from was after the fact, when the congregation, the black congregation who had suffered and lost life and mourned the loss of their loved ones, in a moment of absolute abject forgiveness, turned to him and said, "We forgive you. We don't want the death penalty." And I think the prosecution still sought out the death penalty, but those people who were suffering and the most justified to ask for the death penalty in their moment of pain still chose to promote their values of forgiveness for this horrible monster. That's a really powerful moment to me. And then you could go the Batman route where they just put on a mask and they just beat up bad guys all day. But that's an equally valid approach towards crime and justice.
Yeah.
What do you get out of it?
You get peace.
Well, do you get peace by the assailant being electrified? Or do you get peace by you making peace with the assailant who did something bad to you?
Yeah, I mean, an eye for an eye makes the world blind, as the saying goes, and almost everybody who seeks revenge, who gets a chance to talk about it, regrets it because they're like, well, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I am particularly, prescribing to one approach or over the other.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just saying that those are two different approaches you can take, and I'm not sure which one is necessarily right or wrong, but there are
yeah,
different options. It doesn't always have to be the Batman story, and it doesn't always have to be the forgiveness story. There's somewhere in between. I'm a big believer in putting people away who are going to continue to cause harm. And
yeah,
that's a very, very important distinction to make. If somebody is incorrigible, like for example, some of these stalkers and some of the horrible people I've dealt with, they are incorrigible. The only way they'll stop causing damages and crime and hurting people is if they're put away. Like my ideal situation is you put these people in jail.
yeah. I mean, because there's really no there's really no good reason for them to be doing this. I mean, so much time has passed. It's so far gone. Like you're so far away from the time when you were doing that work together. It's at this point, it's at the point of almost psychopathy or like
Yeah,
obsession. It's like a real obsession.
it is
Um,
absolutely a real obsession. There is a book that somebody recommended to me called this Psychopath Free. And
mm,
it's a book that I would never pick up in a million years because it just sounds like a corny self-help book. I hate the title. I hate everything about it. But I decided to give it a shot anyway, and it has been absolutely mind-blowing listening to this book because they talk about, and by the way, psychopath is not one of the classical uh, I guess diagnoses. It's not. It's a kind of a colloquial term, right? Like
yeah.
psychopathy, sociopathy. They're all cluster B personality types. Am I getting that right?
No, they're not actually. They're sort of off. It, I think they're more of a legal, like law enforcement type of thing. I think they're more of a forensic psychiatry thing, but they're not even. You know what? If I had the healthcare record open, I would search sociopath, psychopath, and see if they have ICD-10 codes. Actually, I mean, I could search it right now. But cluster Bs, those are that's like narcissism, borderlines, histrionic used to be on it, and I think it fell off. Um, Antisocial. Those are the main ones.
And there's one more, I think. But yeah, you're right. You're hitting on all the main ones.
Yeah.
And well, the reason I mentioned that is because in this book he talks about that. He says that psychopathy doesn't have, isn't coded to one of these, but it's kind of a combination that's kind of an umbrella term that
Mhm.
represents these cluster B personality types. And he says in this book that thankfully it's rare, but it's not so rare that you'll never encounter it. And
Yeah.
I unfortunately have with this sociopathic stalker. And he talks about all the ways in which these patterns emerge, with obsession to spreading gossip and rumors about another person to monetizing it, which is such a specific thing that my mind was blown when I heard this. It made me feel like, holy, this is a real thing. And it's not only real and specific to me, but other people have experienced this as well. Absolutely
Yeah.
mind blowing.
Yeah. It's when people can get on the internet and find pretty much anything that they can think of by searching it.
Bingo. You're
That
hitting on something really. So this is an essay I've been wanting to write and
oh
produce for
my
a long
gosh.
time.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I
so
feel the fire then. Go.
yeah. I know we're probably coming up on our time here, but I really want to touch on this. This is
Yeah.
such the big thesis that I have here is about the failure of social media. The failure of social media. Okay, so when Mark Zuckerberg or anyone who's created a social media platform, Dorsey or any of these people who've built one, they always talk about this philosophy of connectivity. They're making the world a more connected place, and wouldn't that be a better thing if we're all more closely connected, right? Well, the problem with that philosophy is, and this is something that they didn't anticipate when they first started creating this stuff or didn't care, because they're making a lot of money, is that normal people don't need to be connected on social media.
Yeah.
Normies have social lives and they're social and they're already connected. You know who isn't connected? Outliers, weirdos, sociopaths, white nationalists, people with a deviant sexual behavior. Those people don't have communities. And
Yeah.
social media has made it easier for not normal people to connect with each other, although that surely happens, but it's made it easier for sociopaths and these deviants to also connect and build community. So
Yes.
suddenly, whereas you had these voices of like white nationalism, white supremacy, sexual deviancy being held and suppressed in the fringes of society, now they have found one another and they think they've normalized their voices. And what's worse is that the algorithms have really started promoting filter bubbles. So if you believe something enough and you click on enough links that are going to reaffirm and bolster your worldview, you're going to start to think that it's normal. You're going to
Yeah.
start to think that everybody thinks your way. And that's why you have so many people who are stuck in their filter bubbles of conservatism or liberalism or any ideology or philosophy that you like, that you prescribe to, that you ascribe to, that you're prescribed to, then you're going to continually get that content. And it's just going to be a runaway cycle where you're going to think that everybody thinks the same way you do. And you're going to connect with the worst elements of society, which are people who have your own awful beliefs. I think that is the big failure of social media that nobody's really talking about.
Yeah. Um, there was there's a radio show I listened to, and they just interviewed a guy named H.G. Tutor. Tudor is his last name, and he's a self-proclaimed um, ultra narcissist. So he claims he's a psychopath, and he's like the only ultra narcissist. And the reason why he says that is that he is the only narcissist who is able to talk about his narcissism, and it was something else. And he basically wants to help the world to understand narcissists. So it's kind of an interesting little circle there. But he made a comment about social media. He said that social media does not create more narcissists. It gives narcissists an avenue to influence others. So then you end up with really bad people having more connectivity to people that they would otherwise have no connection to.
Right.
So not only do the bad people find each other more easily, really great example would be like PlayStation Network and the terrorists. There was something about that a few years ago. That's the most extreme example though. But then they start influencing people, and we all have traits. Everybody in theory has traits of a narcissist and of a antisocial. For example, like I'm going to be a narcissist, and I'm going to feed myself first, and I'm going to feed somebody else. But then I'm going to temper that narcissism by that narcissistic trait, right? But so yeah, like people can appear like they're a narcissist because they're saying, "Oh, look at me, look at me, look at me," but they're not a narcissist. So I thought it was an interesting thing. But I was going to do a piece on H.G. Tutor because he thinks he is just being entertained by watching non-narcissists get empowered against the unaware narcissists and just destroying them, when his legacy is the destruction of his kind. Because he's either going to end up in the history books and his kind is going to be extinguished, or his books are going to be ineffective and he will fall out of history and he will not be remembered. But I have another theory about this, and I want to see what you think about this, Maddox. Is it possible that all the different human psychopathies are there to be locked into people where it's necessary? Like a narcissist is created when they have the genetic markers and when they have the really bad environment that creates their state of being. And then when they have kids, or if they have kids, how are those kids going to be? A lot of times, a narcissist's kids are not narcissistic at all, because the kids were so hyper aware of their parents' narcissism that they don't want to be like that. And then so then it's like it's a strong signal to not create any more of it. So it's almost like it's a defense mechanism, and it's like and it's supposed to have a correctional effect on the environment. It's just a theory I have.
Interesting. So the question is like, is there some societal benefit to narcissists?
Not a benefit, just maybe a vestigial reason that that capability is there. And maybe we're just not understanding it. And our lack of awareness of it, that when a narcissist is manipulating us, our lack of awareness is one of the greatest like vulnerabilities. Like the biggest thing is, once you know, you go. This is what HD Tutor says. Once you know you're dealing with a narcissist, you run away from them.
Right.
But the funny thing is, HD Tutor has convinced hundreds of thousands of people in most countries on the planet to follow his stuff, and he's a narcissist, and everybody's not going.
Yeah,
Run away from him.
I'm kind of confused when I look at his content. Like I'm looking at one of his books on Amazon. It seems to have really positive reviews. A lot of people say they've gotten some really life-changing things from it. But then if this guy, and I don't know enough about him, I
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to do some research and understand what this guy's philosophy is and where he's coming from. But if this guy is a true narcissistic personality disorder type, or, tending on the sociopathy spectrum, then his entire mission seems to undermine and betray his diagnosis of narcissism, because narcissists classically cannot empathize, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He talks about cognitive empathy, and that this, like, the more able to mimic people, like I mean, just the people who are very skilled at feigning a response, feigning understanding, feigning any sort of like feeling. That's what he calls cognitive empathy. It's not true empathy.
So
So
he's feigning that.
right, he does it so that he's functional in society and functional in relationships, when
Well,
in fact he doesn't feel anything.
is it possible that if you question to what end, it's just money?
Yeah, it is. I mean, for him, he's making money. I mean, he's published 40 books, and he's got the podcast, and it makes a lot of sense. Like what he's saying, he's like, yeah, and I find it very entertaining. But a lot of people come up and say, oh, well, you're actually helping society a lot. I'm like, no, you're actually making yourself the most successful narcissist, and you're putting all the other ones down, and most of them don't even know they're narcissists. So it's actually one of the most like denigrating things that he's doing to all narcissists, at least from his worldview. So it's just kind of bizarre. But then it just made me start thinking about the ecosystem theory, that the personality disorders are adaptive responses to environments, and the disorders themselves are designed to destroy themselves, to teach a lesson to the community to make itself better. I don't know. I just think there's something there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's definitely something that you can research and dig more into. I am curious though about, so in this book, the one I listened to was Psychopath Free, and they talked about this whole philosophy near the end of the book, which is having compassion for these people who may be a product of their environment and their upbringing. So when I first went down this path of self-discovery and understanding, because I didn't quite understand why these bad people had come into my life. I'm a big advocate of mental health. I'm always telling people, oh, you should talk to a therapist. You should talk to a therapist. Until one day I realized I had never talked to a therapist. So I decided to put my money where my mouth is. And I decided to talk to a therapist. And my first therapist I spoke to, she said, why are you here? I said, I don't know. She says, are you suffering from depression? I said, no. How about anxiety? I said, no. She said, insomnia, any kind of issues like that? I said, no, I'm completely fine, thankfully. I do have one question though, which is what was it about these bad people that were attracted to me? And what was it about me that attracted me to them? Because at some point in my life, I allowed these people into my life. And over the course of my discovery, my journey through therapy and talking to different people, one of my therapists told me that it is possible to have a surplus of empathy. And
Yep.
I didn't understand what that was. And he says, yeah, you can be too empathetic. And
Yep.
that was my big discovery, because at the
Yep.
time I would see some of these people with extreme narcissistic personality disorders,
Yeah.
verging on sociopathy, some of their behavior, some of their words, some of their actions, and I wouldn't judge them. I would say, well, look, we're all a product of our upbringing. And if I
Yeah.
was the same person who had a similar upbringing and similar environments and similar experiences, I might be the same person. So
Yes.
I'm not going to judge them, and I'm going to let them into my life. And that's what has caused problems.
Yes, and I think this is one of the greatest strengths of your humor and your satire, Maddox, because of your empathy. I think your empathy is why like all of this shit is so funny. Like it's so fun. Like the Lord of the Rings one and the iRobot, like the iRobot one. I fell off my chair when I saw that one. But like, um, so then when you get into these relationships with people, you justify the best. It's like
Yeah.
Tom Welling in Smallville. Okay, did you ever watch Smallville?
No, I'm familiar with the show though.
Okay, but the whole thing of that show was Superman's coming into adulthood and eventually becoming the Superman. But the common thread I saw in that show was that uh Clark Kent always saw the best in people and he always got burned by them.
Yeah.
So I think in that series, the 10 seasons that it ran for, I think it's all about the indestructible Kryptonian who by being almost indestructible is allowed to practice almost perfect empathy with everybody, and his relationships get totally mostly burned by it.
Yeah.
And
Empathy. Yeah. It,
yeah,
it, it can be a double-edged sword. And I realized that empathy, I don't remember who told me this or where I learned it exactly, but empathy can be a self-defense mechanism that you evolve and become, you fine tune and become very sensitive to as a self-defense mechanism when you're raised by people who are very hairpin trigger with their emotions because you have to read their emotions very accurately and very quickly to come up with a very quick assessment on how they're feeling so you can protect yourself. And that's
yep,
where sometimes a surplus of empathy comes from. And that was one of my big discoveries and one of my big journeys. However, at the end of this book, Psychopath Free, they talk about this thing where we can have compassion for these people because, again, you're not choosing to be in that environment that raised you to be that way, right? But for some people, for some of these, quote, psychopaths that are, part of this cluster B personality type, they don't have a moral compass. They don't have that reason to be the way they are. I've met like this particular stalker who's been obsessed with me for over 6 years. I've met his family. There's no indication that there's any kind of severe drug abuse or alcoholism or physical abuse to my knowledge. And yet you still have this insane sociopath who is hurting everybody around him. So sometimes the thesis of this book, the conclusion was there are people who just are just a pit of darkness and emptiness, and they just want to fill that emptiness with anything they can, and it's usually causing suffering from other people whose empathy they can never truly experience, whose kindness they can never truly have, and whose compassion they can never truly relate with.
yeah. Once you know, you go, but you're trying to go and you can't because you keep getting spammed.
Well,
So
it's
you
I'll
still
say
got to
this.
solve
I'll
that
say
problem.
yeah. I mean, I'm really glad that I made this documentary and I put it out and it's out in the world. It's definitely made things much better in a number of ways. But it's interesting. I look at this book by H.G. Tutor called No Contact, and it's
Yep,
basically his approach towards dealing with sociopaths
yep.
and narcissistic personality disorder, more particularly. But yeah, it's
And
interesting because I've heard that advice from a number of different places.
and you have to remember that no contact is not just, not like I deleted them off my phone, taking up space in here. How do you get them out of your thoughts? That's that, like you just have to let them go on every single level.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting you say that because I remember when I was talking to one of my therapists, she's like, "Well, at some point I was working on this documentary." She goes, "Well, what happens after?" I said, "After I go back to work and I work on my regular stuff." And yeah, that's what I've been doing. I'm living my
that's
life and it's
that's good.
fantastic. Yeah, I am working on things that bring me joy and fulfillment, and I am just waking up every day looking forward to living another day on this earth.
Heck yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, man, what was there was another thing I wanted folks to be aware of. I mean, like people just need to go and check out your website just to appreciate all of the all of the content. Was there anything else in particular that you feel compelled to discuss or talk about, just as it relates to psych and medicine and humor and
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because speaking of like a zeitgeist or national, global consciousness or something like that, there
yeah,
does seem to be some kind of cultural awareness coming to head with regards to social media and how much time we spend on it and whether or not it's good and where we're going with AI. I think that all those roads are starting to converge and cross somewhere, and I'm not sure where, and I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it's going to be a very interesting moment because I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to this realization of like how extremely damaging social media can be to us, our psyche, our sense of peace, our sleep, our sense of well-being in so many different ways. And I think that we're
yeah.
all starting to have that awareness, and I'm not sure where this is going to lead.
I mean, it's uh, chicken or the egg. Like, where do you even begin to start talking about that? I mean, dopamine. You could just talk about dopamine and the dopamine hit that you get when you get just one like on a comment. Oh, and then you wake up the next day and there's 15 likes on a comment, and you're like, oh wow, great. I remember those days, like in college, and you write a comment and there's all this stuff. But then there's all this downtime. But it's kind of like a dog. You train a dog to do something and you give them a treat to do a trick, and then that dog is now trained to do that thing, but it's not always going to get a treat every time it does that thing. Now it's trained
Right,
to do it. Social media is turning us into dogs. So
right.
we're waiting for that dopamine hit. So because the dopamine hit came, it could come again. So then we keep doing it. But all it does is it leads to us sitting on our rear ends, not getting any exercise, not getting sunlight, testosterone's tanking, men like men's
Hey,
grip
speak,
strength.
speak for yourself, buddy. I'm bald as hell and I'm strong as shit. So
Oh no, I mean
too much testosterone over
yeah.
here. I have a surplus. But no,
No, that's
I'm joking, obviously, but you're making a good point. We have surplus of just sitting down and not getting enough exercise and feeling depressed and spending too much time on. I am curious though, in your studies, I'm sure you've read studies about this. What happens when a person or an animal does a behavior that is normally rewarded with a dopamine hit, and that dopamine hit doesn't come?
oh that that scenario. I'm not aware of any study like that.
Because
Um,
you touched on something really important just now, which I'm really thinking about. Because sometimes you could do everything right on social media. You could do the exact same behavior, exact same style of content, exact same strategies,
yeah.
post a piece of content that doesn't get the same reaction that it did before. So that dopamine hit doesn't come. What happens then?
Well, then you're gonna stop doing that thing. That's what I would think. I think the more times that well, so, okay, so history matters. So like medical history, so history of the test subject matters. If that test subject, if we're talking about like development of whatever like little child version of the thing into the adult thing, um, it would have had to grow up in captivity outside of a normal environment for that to even be studied. And I'm just going to take a guess. The outcome of that would be disastrous unless the animal was living in captivity.
Hmm.
I mean, it's the same thing with like mice that are born and their guts are totally sterile. So they did this with rats or mice or whatever. You've heard of the microbiome and like the bacteria in our gut and everything.
Yes.
Well, there's a lactobacillus ranii. It starts with an R. But when a woman gives birth, there's a study that shows this. There is a lactobacillus that goes from mom's rectal cavity into her bloodstream straight to the breast milk, so that the baby's first meal has this bacteria in it, because that seeding of the bacteria is so important. Well, when they have mice that are sterile, as in no bacteria in their gut, their brains don't develop at all. And they're just laying there and they just
Oh,
perish. They can't even feed themselves. So we have such a deep relationship with just our microbiome. But with behaviors, I think it you would have to not have any of that training in that behavior to begin with. Do you see why it's a difficult question to answer? It would have to be in captivity away from any parents at all. So does that make sense?
I think so. So it's hard to even control for or study something like that.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if that speaks to why people sometimes quit producing content or making social media posts if they don't continually get the same response that they always did. They're missing the dopamine reward. So they
Yeah.
might just say, okay, well, I quit. This is not what I expected. I'm not getting any satisfaction from this, so I'm not going to do this anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah. That, I mean, that's a reasonable explanation for why people quit. But then there's some people that just say, no, I'm in this for the long fight. I mean, like I'm gonna keep going. And I know there's gonna be mostly bad days, but I'm gonna keep doing this thing because it's fun. You
I
know,
wish, yeah,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
mean, so like this leads to a question about like what moves us and what motivates us.
Right.
So a really good friend of mine, shout out to Josh, uh, he said, I work out for me. I only work out for me, nobody else, no other reason. And I've been thinking about this, and I understand why. Because it's just me. I'm not going to base whether I work out, which is good for you. I'm not going to base that on somebody else. I'm not going to base it on any number of women. I don't care if there's 50 of them lined up outside. Oh yeah, I hope you work out. And modeling good behavior for our children is important. But again, that's all temporary thing. The only thing is just you. If you do it for you, you'll keep doing it. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, I agree that the motivation has to be intrinsic. And that's why sometimes I tell friends if they're going to travel somewhere. I have a friend who was going to travel to another state. He says, oh, I'm talking to this girl over there and I might end up hooking up with her. And I said, okay, great. If it happens, it happens. But what if it doesn't? Are you going there with any other plan? Do you have any other reason to be there? Do you want to be there? Because if you don't, you're going to be crushed if your original plan, your plan A, doesn't happen. You need to go there for you so that if no matter what happens, it's not contingent upon another person's plans or whims. You're going
Yes.
for yourself, you're doing something for yourself. And then the byproduct is, oh, X, Y, and Z positive benefits. Some girls more interested in me, or some friends interested in me. My social status is right, has risen. That's a byproduct of doing something good for yourself. But yeah, I agree with that. Doing it for yourself first and foremost is always the way to go.
Yeah, it's like the oxygen mask on the plane. You know, they always say give yourself the oxygen before you help somebody else. That's the most fundamental example right there. Um, I wanted to touch on video games. I think it's something that we don't talk about enough when it comes to mental health and just having a balanced lifestyle. Now, Maddox, I expect you're a little bit older than me. I'm 38.
46.
You're 46. Okay. Wow. Well, you don't look 46 anyway. So you're taking care of yourself, it seems. So, but when I was, and I think our taste in games is similar, but not exactly the same. But when I was growing up, I liked real time strategy games. So I played Warcraft, Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3. And you remember when World of Warcraft came out? It came out in 2004. And that's when I graduated high school. And I was going into college. I knew I was going to go into medicine and I knew I had to study. So I saw what the game was. I saw everything about it and I instantly synthesized what it would mean to play it with what I had in front of me and what I had to do. And I said, I'm never touching the game ever. I love the universe. I love the story. Like tons of nostalgia, but I decided to never play it because I'm like, it's not compatible with what I need to get done. I'm going to college to as a means to an end to become a physician, which I did. In my dorms, I watched dorm mate after dorm mate after dorm mate destroy their college career with this game. They got on and they had no impulse control, sitting and waiting for dungeon crawls of 40 people, whatever it is. and they got kicked out of the dorms in the first semester. Two guys did, and then other like so with the proliferation of online games, with games that don't have a beginning, well, that don't have an end anymore. This is, I think it's a disease in video games. I really think that this is a disease that's affected video game. Like you used to be able to play a pixelated game with no crappy voice acting, with no over rendered graphics, with just a really cool system that was interactive and you might play with one other person or three other people. And there's a beginning and an end. And then you can go outside and ride your bike or go work out or do something like tangible with your life. But now it seems like video games just suck everybody in. And the people that don't have the training to have restraint sucks them in. Is it?
Yeah.
And maybe it's like social media.
Yeah, it's very much like social media. One of the worst examples of it in terms of web design and UX and UI is the rubber band scrolling endless page, where you just go to the bottom of the page and it just loads more, and you go to the bottom of the page and it loads more. And it's like, well, is there ever going to be an end to the site? Can I just, it used to be like my website where you'd go to my website and you'd go to the end and it's like, okay, you reached the end of the number of posts for this year. Now you got to click on 2004, and then once you get to 2004 you got to click on 2003. You're making a deliberate effort to do that.
Yeah.
They have taken that away from most of us these days, where we sometimes casually scroll forever. Like there is no bottom to Instagram will always load more BS for you to see constantly. And with video games like that, I very much like you made a deliberate effort not to play World of Warcraft. I know World of Warcraft's a great game.
It's awesome.
I've never played it. I know it's a great game. I just know it is.
Yes.
But I'm never going to play it. I'm never going to deliberately play it because I know I'll get sucked in. I'm a completionist and I will play the dumbest games. I have wasted hours on web browser games because I'm procrastinating a project, and I will conquer every single aspect of this BS little Flash game that somebody made in like 1998 or 1999 just because I want to conquer it all. And with a game like World of Warcraft, it's so dangerous because it's so limitless. It's so wide in scope and so vast, so many things to do. Oh man, I am glad I never got into those types of games. The types of games I play these days are ones where I can pick up, play very quickly, and put away, and I don't have to worry about getting invested in storylines. Don't care. I just don't care. And also, like board games, card games, anything like that, I skip the story. I don't care. I don't want to know the backstory of this bullshit card or game that I'm holding. These characters don't matter to me. They're completely disposable. Please, God, let me just play a few levels and let me turn it off and get back on with my life. I just don't care. I have enough storylines in my life, and my life is interesting enough. I don't need any more storylines. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's all about having an in-person relationship with other people, and the more, and all those things just kind of disconnect us from each other. It's all about having healthy connections to each other.
I mean, I get it. It's very big in the Midwest. If you look at the statistics of where fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons and any kind of like comic books and comic book movies and that sort of thing, it's always the Midwest. It's always the places where there isn't as much to do. And that's not even a knock. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you live in this place. There isn't as much to do. You're going to stay home. The weather's bad. You're going to get involved and engrossed in a fantasy world. It's escapism. I get that. But I live in Los Angeles. We don't have to do that shit. There's tons of stuff to do. I can go outside. There's things going on. I can talk to real people on the corner. And guess what? They're pretty interesting too.
That's a good point. I never got into D&D. It just wasn't anything that interested me.
Oh, it's a blast. You're missing out. You should totally get into it. It's really fun. I dungeon mastered a few times. My favorite thing.
You did?
Oh yeah. I'm a great storyteller. I can just go. I can keep you guessing. I can keep you on the edge of your seat. And also when I play with other people, they create a very well-crafted narrative, and I always screw it up. I always throw a wrench in the works. And I don't know if that's good player or not, but I'm entertained. And I'm entertaining myself and my friends, so whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all about having fun and just making good memories with friends. Again, healthy relationships, people. Yep. This is Maddox. This is a great satirist, a great writer, a great guy.
Appreciate that.
So thank you, Maddox. Thank you, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I would love to do this again and
Right on.
come up with some other topics. If we can, maybe expound on some other things we talked about it because
Sounds great.
we jumped all over the place. But
Yeah, let's do it again.
thanks, man.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Yep.
All
Yeah.
right, take care.